After what could only be described as a disaster last season for Chelsea Football Club, things could only get better. Lampard left, as did half of the first team, and Mauricio Pochettino came in, and the early signs looked really promising. In pre-season, we were banging goals in for fun. We were showcasing a lot of the young, exciting talent that Poch now had at his disposal, and we sort of knew that, as well as it was going, the true test would only really arrive when the Premier League returned, and what tougher test than to face Liverpool on the opening weekend of the season. Jurgen Klopp's men looked ready to mount another title challenge, and the omens for Chelsea really didn't look good coming into this match. We had only won in one of the last 10 meetings between these two clubs, but a 1-1 draw followed, and Chelsea drew a lot of plaudits from the media, from our fans, because we outplayed Liverpool for huge chunks of that game. We had looked really good, and to me, it was quite clear that come the end of the season, Chelsea were going to be there or thereabouts when it came to competing again for Champions League football. But things took a very quick turn for the worst, as after the spirited 1-1 draw against Liverpool, Chelsea then had a sort of shock loss to West Ham, and by the end of game week 6, we were sat with just one win in our first 6 games. In those 6 games, we had lost 3, we had drawn twice, and the single victory we did have came against a team that I think most people would have made as favourites for relegation going into the season in Luton Town. And I'm going to risk upsetting a few people here, but barring the game against Liverpool, most people, including the bookmakers, would have made Chelsea heavy favourites as the team to win in most of those games. We weren't scoring goals, we were showing a lack of character, and it looked to us fans like we were in for another long, painful season. And I'm going to caveat this by saying I understand, just purely based off the back of 3 wins in a row, it does not mean that Chelsea have completely turned things around and we're going to be right up there come the end of the season. But we've got to acknowledge that clearly, Mauricio Pochettino has turned a corner now with this Chelsea team and started to implement a lot more of what we wanted to see and what he wanted to see from that team. So in this video, I want to explore exactly how he has done it and what he has done. People, before we get into it, if you are new around here, welcome to the Joey Knight podcast. Do me a massive favour at the end of the video. If you like the content, please click the subscribe, hit the bell so that you get a notification every time one of my videos goes live. Now let's get into it. So the first thing that Poch has done is he's tweaked the formation ever so slightly. Here is how we lined up against Aston Villa, the last game that we lost, and here is how we lined up in the weekend's game against Burnley. And the first thing that you might see is it's not all that different, with just 3 changes, obviously 2 of which come in via suspensions. But as much as I do rate these players, I don't think the fact that Cucurella replaced Malo Gusto and obviously Broja replaced the recently returning Jackson, I don't think they were massive contributing factors as to what has changed here. So the main difference you're obviously going to see here is a change in the shape of midfield. Now obviously Poch had previously been playing Enzo Fernandez as a 10, and although I think he holds the ability and obviously the creativity to play in that position, most people would agree that Enzo's best position is probably a little bit further back. However, as we all know, throughout Poch's career, his predominant formation has always been that 4-2-3-1, and with the injuries to both Christopher Nkunku and Kane Chukwuemeka, it obviously meant that he needed someone with that creativity to play in that 10 role, which is why he had Enzo Fernandez there. Meanwhile, Poch was opting to put his faith week in, week out in Conor Gallagher, and the case of Conor Gallagher is a bit of a strange one. So very, very rarely has Conor Gallagher ever really put in a bad performance for Chelsea, but up until recently, very rarely were the fan base, including myself at times, calling for Conor Gallagher to be starting every game. Now, Gallagher was being utilised as the partner to Caicedo in the pivot, and to an extent, I sort of get it, Obviously, Gallagher's engine and his tenaciousness do make him a candidate for that role, but for me, even defensively, I've always felt like Conor Gallagher is better higher up the pitch, and this is where the first tweak to Pochettino's system was made. Poch sticks with the personnel, but twists ever so slightly when it comes to the formation, moving Enzo Fernandez slightly back out of the 10 into an 8 position, and pushing Conor Gallagher slightly forward out of a 6, also into an 8 position, leaving Caicedo as a single pivot, where over the last couple of weeks, we've seen him flourish. However, However, he's not completely left there on his own, because whenever obviously the other team have got the ball or he needs the players around him, Conor Gallagher and Enzo Fernandez are dropping in alongside him and giving him the options as players to help him out. And the formation tweak doesn't leave us without a number 10, because when we're going forward and attacking with the ball, what you're seeing is one of Enzo or Conor Gallagher occupy that space. More so, we're seeing Conor Gallagher do it, and I actually personally believe that suits our system and Conor Gallagher's game a million times better than it suited us to have Enzo in that number 10. Obviously, you look at Conor Gallagher's performances for Crystal Palace, a loan spell which brought him a lot of plaudits, and you very rarely saw him playing as deep as you've seen him at the start of the season playing for Chelsea. Conor Gallagher was obviously pushed a lot higher forward for Palace. He was winning them the ball, he was creating opportunities, and since he has been doing that for Chelsea, I think it's completely unlocked our midfield. I think everyone knows their position, looks a lot more comfortable in their position all of a sudden. And I actually think, in a strange way, Gallagher playing further forward has made our midfield three look like a lot more of a understanding and sort of cohesive midfield trio. So that tweak to the midfield three is, in my opinion, the most pivotal and most important thing that Pochettino has done over the last couple of weeks, but it is not the single contributing factor as to how he has turned Chelsea's form of recent around. Because another thing he has done is find leadership in this side. Obviously, at the start of the season, we were looking at it and there was one big question we had, and that was, who was Mauricio Pochettino gonna make as Chelsea club captain? Now, we all sort of thought it would either be Reece James, Ben Chilwell, Thiago Silva, and let's be honest, we weren't far off, were we? Reece James was given the captain's armband and Ben Chilwell was made vice-captain. And as much as we love both players, the problem is with Reece and Chile, we all know, don't we? They both come with their injury issues, and that's obviously come to fruition again because we're 8 games into the season and we are now without both available for selection. So when both were out injured, obviously Pochettino had another decision to make. Do we give the captaincy to Thiago Silva? Obviously Raheem Sterling is another senior player within that team, but no. Pochettino opted to give Conor Gallagher the captaincy. And although this one may have raised a few eyebrows at first, I actually believe that this was a complete masterstroke. In all walks of life, a person's performance individually can be massively raised by added responsibility, and I do genuinely believe that that is what you are seeing here with Conor Gallagher. Gallagher's stepped up to the plate, and in the last few games he has been immense, and he's emerged as a real leadership figure in a team that in weeks gone by we sort of labelled as not having any real leadership. I was watching a David Beckham documentary on Netflix the other day, as I'm sure a lot of you did. One thing that sort of surprised me was how much David Beckham's performances were massively elevated once he was given the captain's armband for England. And obviously I think to a lesser extent that's sort of what we're starting to see with Conor Gallagher now. He's becoming a more mature and composed figure in this Chelsea side. And when you think about it, yeah, he's actually the perfect fit, isn't it? Like, if you took away the fact that maybe initially we didn't see him start in every match, he's obviously a player that leads by example when it comes to leaving every single ounce on that pitch. He's a young midfield player who looks like he's going to play at the top level for years to come. And most importantly, he's an academy product that knows and understands the club in a time where other academy products are being sold off, and maybe we don't have as many of those sort of players that you need to drive your club forward at Chelsea. And do you know what? Because of his performances so far, I actually think that Pochettino might have somewhat of a decision to make once Reece James comes back. Obviously, everything I just labelled Conor Gallagher as having there, Reece James has. And look, it's not a secret that I obviously think Reece James is a slight cut above Conor Gallagher when it comes to just how good a player we've got on our hands. But, you know, that's no disrespect to Conor Gallagher, because Reece James is definitely one of the best if he can get over these injury problems. But in terms of giving Reece back the armband, I'm not 100% that Mauricio Pochettino will do that straight away. He probably will, you know, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility that Conor Gallagher stays as captain for this season. And obviously, I'll tell you what, even if Conor Gallagher hands the captain's armband back over to Reece, I think that his performance levels will stay as elevated as they have been, because now he knows that he is a senior figure for this Chelsea team and a massive, massive part of Mauricio Pochettino's plans. Now, the penultimate point I'll make on what Poch has done to turn our poor form around of recent is that he has trusted his players. Chelsea rotated their starting 11 more than any other club in the Premier League last season, and I get that due to an overbloated squad, we were always going to rank fairly high on that metric, but we can't deny that when you keep chopping and changing and tinkering with the team, it does create for huge instability. Now, players need to form relationships and they need to share experiences, whether that be for positive or negative. And if you keep changing the team week in, week out, they're just not going to have the opportunity to do that. However, despite rotating one or two players, maybe Mykhailo Mudryk and Ugachukwu, Poch's changes have mostly been forced by injury or suspension. And my guess would be that had we not had those players unavailable for selection, we would have seen a very stable and unrotated lineup this season. And you know what? It's easy to stick to your guns when you're winning games, isn't it? But when you get off to a bad start, obviously the pressure to maybe drop a Nicholas Jackson, maybe to move a Levi Colwill out of that left back position, obviously grow louder and louder. And when you're winning games, you don't really hear many people questioning your decisions. Let's take Colwill, for example, right? Anyone that watches the channel knows that I don't personally think that Colwill is the future of Chelsea at left back. Levi Colwill is definitely the future of Chelsea, but I see it being at centre back. Thiago Silva's coming towards the end, and I see Levi Colwill maybe even going on to be a club captain at some point. That's how important to us I do genuinely believe he is. But just because I don't see him as a left back, that doesn't mean I'm right. Many people don't see Ben White as a right back. But you know why they don't moan about it? Because Arsenal are winning games. Many people don't see Dan Burn as a left back, but they don't moan about it because Newcastle are winning games. You can see where I'm going with this. So when your team aren't winning games, you got to sort of look at the information available to you and start to ask the question, well, where are we going wrong? And those will be the obvious things that jump out at you. But Pochettino is the man to make those calls, and the fact that he hasn't bent to fan pressure on these situations are clearly starting to pay off for him now. And the final point I want to make on how Pochettino has turned things around is a tactical one, and for me, it lies in the instruction that he is giving to this team. So in the first 6 league games of the season, Chelsea had the lion's share of possession in all of those games, and in some of those games, we had up to 70% of the ball, and at a glance, you could look at it and you could think, okay, well, that's a good thing, but I genuinely do think that having that possession is only effective if you know what to do with it. And at times, Chelsea have not been too effective with the possession. Now, obviously, the longer you have the ball, the longer the opposition have to get into their shape and to structure themselves and compose themselves as a team. And when you're a Manchester City, that don't really matter all that much because your creativity and your know-how in games is just so far advanced over the opposition, you're still going to be able to break them down. But when you've got a young team that has just been thrown together over the last year or so like Chelsea's, you're going to really struggle, and teams will be happy to sort of sit in that sort of structured formation against you and catch you on the break, as West Ham and Nottingham Forest did against us this season. So Pochettino knew that something had to change, and if you look at the last 3 games, in 2 of them we've actually had less possession than the opponents. Even in the game against Burnley this weekend where we had more possession than the opponents, we didn't have anywhere near as much possession as we did against Luton. The last game we won by a 3-goal margin, and what I believe that has done is create more opportunities for us, because when the other team have more of the ball, they're going to push forward, their formation is going to expand, and it's going to create sort of spaces for us to either run in behind or opportunities for the likes of maybe an Enzo Fernandez to pick out a pass into space that might not have previously been there. Also, when you look at the passing stats, you can see that our passes per game and to a lesser extent our pass accuracy are both down, and believe it or not, I actually ironically think that this is something that has helped us. If you look at the game against Nottingham Forest, right, we had 77% possession, we made 713 passes with an accuracy of 88%. But then when you look at the game against Fulham, a match that I thought was one of our better performances so far of this season, we had 44% possession, we made 462 passes with a success rate of 85%. So if you didn't know the scoreline of either of those matches, right, and I showed you these stats, you may well think that the Fulham result would be far less favourable to us than the Nottingham Forest result. But that's not how it's working at the moment, because as I've said before, it's not so much about how much of the ball you have, but it's more so about what you do with it. And this is why in the match against Fulham and on the weekend against Burnley, we were able to counter-attack a lot more, The passes and the pass accuracy being down also reflect, in my opinion, the sort of passes that we're trying to make. So in a nutshell, I believe that Mauricio Pochettino has told his team to be more direct and take more risks. So if you think about it like this, if you're sideways passing the ball along the back line, your pass accuracy is going to be massively favourable to you, yeah? Your pass stats are probably going to be a lot higher. However, with lower pass stats, you would imagine in a team that possess a lot of quality like Chelsea do, means that you have tried to make more creative passes. And when you make these creative passes, sometimes they come off for you, sometimes they don't. But obviously your pass stats might be down, your pass accuracy might be down, but that is because you've tried to make line cutting passes that obviously carry the risk of you losing the possession, but then give you the opportunity to create a lot more chances than you would have been otherwise. So now we're seeing the emergence of players like Cole Palmer, who's very quickly becoming a fan favourite. I think that the stats are sort of starting to reflect having a player like that in the team, and the contribution of a player like that comes in the shape of direct, creative and risk-taking passes, which will work in breaking teams down, just so long as obviously your shape is good and your defence is good at the same time as that, and obviously your pressing's good once we then lose the ball, if that does happen. So I'm not willing to write off the possibility altogether that Chelsea do come back to a heavily sort of possession-based team, but I think for the moment this is working really well for us. So look, hands held up, I am no expert, but for what it is worth, that is how I believe Mauricio Pochettino has managed to help this Chelsea side turn a corner of recent. However, we all know the tough test is what lies ahead. Obviously, we have got a horrendous run of fixtures, but that's maybe a glass half full mentality, because if you look at it from a positive, you're in the Premier League for these big matches. You want to be in Champions League football for big matches. And now our fixture list as fans, if we can start performing in these matches, is absolutely mouthwatering. I do genuinely believe that we're going to see some really good results from some of these fixtures. And I do genuinely believe that in this Chelsea side now, we're starting to form an identity. Is it going to come overnight? Is it going to come this season? I can't really answer you the question. I don't know that. But what I do know is what I'm seeing from Pochettino at the moment, and the way he's being flexible and tweaking his system is something that's really, really encouraging going forwards. But I'd love to know what I haven't covered. What do you lot think is a real contributing factor as to why we're now seeing better performances from Chelsea in the last few games as we were seeing at the start of the season? Please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. When this video drops, I'll be reading all of your comments. I'll try and get back to as many of you as I possibly can. And also, if you've made it to the end of the video, you were clearly liking something, so please do me a massive favour. Hit the subscribe button, click the bell so that you get a notification every time one of my videos goes live. You subscribing to this channel helps me more than you would believe, so please do that, and I will see you all in the next one.